First of all, on the agenda, before I even go any further, I had the wrong date on it. And I think you all got a copy of it. And I apologize for screwing up on the date, but also I had written a draft of an attachment below the minutes of the last meeting, and for some reason or another, it did not go out and it disappeared from my computer. So I'll have to improvise with that.
I think I got it, Joe. Was it the water, the drought thing?
Yeah.
Yeah, I got it.
I got it. I read it.
You
And
did.
I sent it back to you actually with some
Comment.
comments and stuff. Yeah. So maybe you'll have it in that form if you look at my email.
Yeah, I did.
Okay.
So we can work on that later. So let's get rocking and rolling on this. We have a few things to talk about. Jeff, are you visual yet?
Yes.
Yeah, he is.
Okay.
You talking to me? Are you talking about me, Joe, or?
I am talking about you.
Well,
You're visual.
I guess that's
He is.
what you call it, right?
Tom, can you put the agenda up?
I put it up on the screen.
Yeah.
Anthony, can you do that?
You should be able to share the document you want to share, Tom.
Okay.
Okay, I can get started without it.
All right.
When it gets up, it gets up. Has anybody, the Shellfish or the Harbor Commission, gotten any communications from Eversource, the Department of Transportation? John,
No.
Steve, or Jeff?
No.
Well, I think we have gotten one communication, which is the 100+ page amended permit application,
Okay.
which was sent to the Harbor Commission. I say 100+ page. I don't know. Maybe it's 1,000+ pages, but sent to the Harbor Commission and to the Shellfish Commission last Friday.
Okay.
But we haven't, of course, had a chance to.
I have not seen it yet.
Yeah, it was sent to John Pinto. There was a link that he had to get a password to view, and then I copied it on a disk from him, but it's too big to email, John. So we have to figure out a way to distribute some of those, some of the different documents. But that is a significant communication, I guess you say. And regarding Eversource, no, we've heard nothing from Eversource. I think that's the extent of our communications, John, unless you have something else.
No. Later on in the meeting, we've been communicating with the state.
Oh, yeah.
DOT.
Yes. And the Harbor Commission did make a communication to the DEEP regarding the bridge project that John can mention later. If he wishes to.
Steve, anything on your end?
No, sir.
Okay. I don't know whether that's good or bad. And Tom, is there anything on your end that we need to know as far as the Department of Health and COVID-19 or anything else?
No, we're just following phase 2 guidelines, as far as the restaurants and the salons and businesses, we're just doing enforcement.
Get a sense of whether there's a push to go to stage 3, or could we stay at 2 for the rest of the summer?
They're looking at potentially delaying phase 3. New York City just canceled the indoor dining aspect of it, so they're kind of wait and see right now.
John?
Yeah.
You called my name.
No. I was telling somebody to go see Joe.
Okay. All right, moving on. Oh, come on. Hey, Louise, I'm looking for your email. And I know I got it today.
Oh, do you want me to just talk
Yeah.
about that, or
Yeah.
I just thought from looking at your well, I was really happy that Mayor Rilling did mention that the drought and the word, and I guess it was in Nancy on Norwalk, and then we got some rain, thank goodness. But it just is always a reminder that we need to, I think we need to update in Norwalk. The mayor does have emergency powers to, you know, declare drought, and maybe Tom or other people know more about this than I do, or Diane. But it does seem like, you know, in 2018, the state put out its drought preparedness plan, and in it is a model language for towns and cities to use. So I just think it might be worth our while as a group to look at that new language and to see if we want to recommend updating. And that was just my recommendation. I started reading through it, but so I guess we have to compare what we have now to what this model language is. I don't know, does anybody else have thoughts on that?
Yeah, Louise, just John Romano. I worked on a committee going back early in the 2000s when there was another drought scenario.
Yeah.
And we developed criteria and what should be shut down and what should not. And, you know, part of it had to do with shutting down viable businesses and hurting them economically. But I think our biggest issue, a drought does happen from time to time. There are ways of handling it. There are protocols in place. And yes, the mayor does have the ability to call emergency and create emergency reaction. I think our biggest problem right now is the volume and source of future water, with tens of thousands of new apartments coming on board.
Right.
People that are renters that, you know, let the water run for an hour. What do they care? They're not paying for it. They
Right.
don't have a meter in their apartment. And if we're going to look to substantiate and help bolster commercial businesses, they may have water uses in manufacturing as well. And I know, I mean, we've been good at over the years of allowing for reclamation of the water, cleaning it, reusing it, and all of that stuff, but still it's a use. So I think that's what our focus should be on moving forward. And that to me is an emergency scenario.
Right. So I don't know enough about this, but I feel like that, Tom, maybe you're involved with how that works, but those decisions are made by the water companies, and at the state water planning capacity and future capacity and how much building can have, like all of that, you know, is sort of out of our hands, isn't it?
Well,
Yeah.
it is and it isn't, because we can make recommendations. And the planning offices and the zoning offices could take a look at creating a sustainable future for Norwalk.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the purpose of my draft. Not what do we do in drought conditions, because I knew we already had that. But can we avoid going into drought emergency conditions? And in order to do so, like John said, right now with what they have on the planning map currently, could be another 8,000 to 10,000 residents.
Yeah.
based on what they have for apartments. And I got that information because when I was at the Harbor Commission meeting in the Planning and Zoning Office, one of the last meetings we had there, you could see all the projects that were ongoing and how much housing was scheduled for this year. And I think it was in the newspaper last week, they're looking at another mega development. And, you know, this could push us over what we can possibly handle. And then we could be in a situation like Stamford and Greenwich, where we have to count on Bridgeport for water. And that's through Aquarian. And that puts two more caveats on our utilities. One, we're now going to not a city-owned or processed water supply, but Aquarian, which is a for-profit water company. And it also, we're at their mercy. And I would hope we don't get to that point. I would hope the planning offices could say, whoa, we may not have enough water for everybody.
Well, one thing, and I don't want to speak out of turn, but one thing that is coming up, you know, the Comstock Brook, which is a tributary to the Norwalk River and an important one that is drinking water, and Second Taxing District has said that they want to raise the dam at Pope's Pond to keep impound more water from that system. That brook is already dry 4 to 5 months a year because of the amount of water that's taken out. So I've been trying to get deep to pay attention to that, and other people have, and TU did a study and stuff. And anyway, they have been looking at that, and they have set up a call with me and I'm bringing in Jeff Yates from TU next week. And so I'm going to ask all these questions. You know, we can't afford to have more water taken out of our watershed. And so given all this, you know, I'm going to ask about this. And I think we have to go to Water Planning Council and with these issues. And as a committee, we have a voice, and, you know, we should figure out the best way to make ourselves heard on
You
this.
better add another piece to that, which is how we're going to handle all the sewage.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Water in and water out are two critical factors. Jeff?
Joe,
Diane had her hand up as well so after Jeff, I would like to
Diane,
speak.
Jeff had his hand up.
So did I, but that's okay. I'll wait for Jeff. I love to hear him. Thank you.
Just to tell you, I'm in. This is Pete.
We see you, Pete.
hey, Pete, the issue Louise brought up, is that not an issue that the Norwalk River Watershed Initiative could discuss? I know that they haven't. I mean, that was our big issue last year, is trying to get meetings going again, and I guess that's sort of problematic. But if there was a functioning watershed initiative, could not that be another voice for raising questions or concerns? And then the other thing about, Joe, you mentioned about the wastewater treatment plant capacity, and I don't recall, but did the Plan of Conservation and Development from last year, did that include any information on capacities related to water supply and wastewater treatment capacity? Is there any information on there that provides any sort of guidance, or did they not address that? I have to go
Diane,
back and look at the POCD.
Diane's nodding her head yes. Go ahead, Diane.
So does that mean that the POCD believes that there is the additional capacity for more multifamily development, and it won't affect water supply, or?
I have no
Or did they-
idea.
All right.
The POCD, I was just going to mention that, Jeff, so it's good that you did mention it. They touch upon it and state that we must be mindful. So, of course, that doesn't give us a lot of comfort. However, I think it's a great idea to have a letter put together, but it's not quite ready for prime time yet. And I really am glad that Louise mentioned what you did about your plans. There is a water planning council in the state. I do want to let you know that whenever there's been one of these large developments like the Glover Avenue monstrosity that's not up for public hearing yet, but they're getting ready, they have something called, and I mentioned this before, something called a Code Enforcement Committee. So what happens is when the developer's lawyers, in this case of Glover, David Waters from Building and Land Technologies in Stamford, I think their home is now, they will go to this Code Enforcement Committee, and I think Tom Closter in the past has mentioned that he's a member of it, of course, and they will ask, they'll bring in the utilities, including electric, water, sewer, planning and zoning, building management, and they'll say, oh, do you have enough water for this particular, will we have the capacity? And what the trend has been is that the two water utilities will say, yes, we can accommodate this. Now the thing is, I assume they're not lying about it, of course, but one thing that we can do, I think, in accordance to what Luis has mentioned and the rest of the group, is that we could claim certain cautionary suggestions that there be a review of the POCD, of the State Water Planning Council's review. But I will say with the building codes, they make sure that the newer building codes restrict the water use and the sewage use. But we should let them know that we are aware that more people produces more sewage, and we want to know how that will work, but mainly more people. We need to be very cautious and also mindful of the threat of climate change and the possibility that we may have extended droughts. But we also may have extended violent rainfalls. So I think it's very good that we mentioned something. I thought the first stab you took at it, Joe, was good. However, I'd like to help you work on a different format where we actually, in the body of the letter, reference some of the Plan of Conservation and Development paragraphs by page where they mention drought and capacity and that sort of thing. So that, I think that would be helpful.
We can add it, but my concern is avoiding droughts. Not how do we handle it once it happens, but how can we get to a point where we're avoiding it? And Jeff, go ahead.
Oh, no, I don't mean to interrupt. I'm talking too much. But going back to before Joe, to the watershed initiative, and I'm not familiar, I'm sorry, Louise, enough with the issue you raised, but is it perhaps useful to ask for a special meeting or a meeting of the watershed initiative and the people who are involved in it, and just to discuss that issue and whether a letter could be written from the chair expressing concerns on that matter? I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with enough with the issue that you raised, but
Yeah, I
could
think
we not?
that's a good idea. Yeah, I think the timing is right for us because that we have 3 water companies and all 3 are raising dams or trying to have new wells, and so we're really feeling it here in our water. We need to respond. We can also go to Water Planning Council meetings. We can just make ourselves more of a presence at the state level and ask questions about how the planning is happening for Southwest Connecticut. There's not, the real problem obviously is Greenwich and Stamford. There needs to be a statewide solution to not enough water in Southwest Connecticut. And the answer is not going to be the Norwalk River. So that's, I think.
I'd like to follow up on something that Joe just said. How do you go about avoiding drought? That's what I'd like to know.
Well, one part or one component of it is educating the public that is unaware of water. I would be willing to bet 70 to 80% of Norwalk never looks at the Norwalk River. So they don't know whether the river is up or down. And they don't recognize the fact that our water supply is tied into that river. And therefore, they are not aware of how their consumption affects that water level. So I think there's an educational component, but I think there's also like an early warning system.
Right. I think you're right. That's what, I mean, and that's where the state's model ordinance comes in. And I'll send it to everybody, the part of it that applies to us. It gives a list. I mean, the first thing you cut back is people watering their lawns. 70% of water is used outside in the summer. So it gives a great list, and when we need to step in earlier, like, way before it's a drought, and have teeth, and there needs to be education. And we stand on stronger footing when we're dealing with the water companies if we've done this, if we've shown that we're working on conservation, don't take more water out of our river.
Right. Louise had sent me a note indicating that according to the Army Corps of Engineers, the water level gauges were down to the 25th percentile. And that was very rare. And by the time I looked at it, it was well below the 25th percentile. So the water levels were dropping pretty rapidly. And I'll be honest, it's not something I look at on a regular basis, maybe once or twice a year, unless there's a crisis. And when we weren't getting rain, that became apparent on my mind, and that's why I initially sent out the letter. And making people aware of how we can measure this, and the water gauges could literally be the cutoff factor. We get down to 25th percentile, and it could be, okay, that's when we send out education to the public and see if they can reduce their consumption. And we go from there. Jeff, you had something you wanted to add?
I don't mean to talk too much, but at the last meeting, I think Chris brought up the proposal by Aquarian to divert water from the Hemlocks Reservoir system to the east to supply Greenwich and Stamford and New Canaan and Darien, which seems to be the plan B from the plan to withdraw from the Norwalk River well fields that was withdrawn last year. So in response to getting that proposal, the Harbor Commission in Fairfield wrote a letter similar to the Harbor Commission, what the Norwalk Commission wrote last year, requesting a public meeting to be able to ask questions on Aquarian's plans and impacts and, long-range plans. And then also there were several environmental groups, or at least two that I'm aware of, that wrote similar letters in Fairfield. So I don't know, Chris, if you've heard any more about that, but there'll be another opportunity for public discussion of Aquarian's plans for water supply in Southwest Connecticut. Hopefully there'll be another public meeting to ask questions about that. Have you heard anything about that, Chris?
Well, there are, yeah, I've seen the application, commented on it. There are two factors within that. One is interbasin transfers, but the other one is they want to basically codify the regionalization of the water supplies so that they don't have to come for a special permit to do interbasin transfers at any time. In other words, they want to consider the whole Southwest one region and not have to worry about interbasin transfers. So that's a significant change in the regulatory framework of how things operate. And, I guess, there's lots of things that have been mentioned here that I could pipe in on. One is voluntary conservation, and what is municipalities putting ordinance in place. And, voluntary conservation go a long way, but I don't know who was it that mentioned it. The average person has very little awareness. There's a connection between the river water levels and how much water they're pouring on their gardens and lawns. And now that they're home working, a lot of them are probably going to be watering a lot more in this dry period. They're watching it and putting more effort into their gardens and lawns. So it's a tricky wicket to be able to get the public to scale back and understand how to scale back. It's a lot of education and outreach. I think mandatory, kind of mandatory restrictions that come into play with municipal ordinances are probably more effective in the short term anyways. The other question I had for Louise is, who are you going to meet with next week? Is that?
Oh, I commented on the integrated water quality report. Yeah, and so Chris Bellucci followed up with me and Corinne Fitting. So okay. I'm really encouraged about that. They've been having tracer cameras in Comstock Brook, and they were gathering together all the historic materials they have, and so I'm really happy to be talking to them. It's going to be on the 7th.
So you're going to do a Zoom meeting?
It's going to be a Zoom meeting, yeah. And Jeff will be on there, and I'll let you guys know what happens.
Yeah, I should probably be on that too.
Yeah, do you want to come be on that?
Yeah, I'll talk to Chris. Or Chris is out this week, but Corinne will be around. 7th, okay. Tuesday. Okay.
Wait, can I ask you a question? So with the regionalization, does that mean if there were to be a new diversion, there wouldn't be an individual permit that we would hear about, or?
Correct. Well, I don't know what you're saying about a new diversion, a connection between, like if they wanted to take water from the first and second district, or if they want to take water from Bridgeport to send it west, it's basically covered under this if we grant the permit with the language they're requesting.
But if they wanted to like tap a new well, would that still go through the permitting process?
No, new wells would still require
Okay.
permits.
Okay, that's my question.
These are large. One thing that I think we should integrate into the discussion is making sure, and maybe we could have a meeting where we show up at a code enforcement committee meeting, because that's where you have all your utilities. You have Eversource, you have Aquarian, who has Aquarian now in their folder, in their file folder, but the first and second taxing district, depending upon where the application is there. And then you have zoning people there, and you have all the players, and it would be great to begin a dialogue so that we are proactive, like Joe has said. We need to be in advance of a problem. But I also think what Louise has said is so important, because that Comstock Brook, according to some state, especially the state plan of conservation and development, but also the water plans, it's not supposed to be dry. And they've been allowed in the second taxing district to kind of squeeze out every drop. And so I'm so happy, Louise, that you, and I'm glad DEP is interested. And then lastly, NERWIC, the whole reason it was set up when I was partaking in that in the 90s. So I think Josh's idea is really important. I guess right now they're planning to have an August meeting. It almost seems like maybe a special meeting would be important to have, at least on a Zoom call, that because even though it rained a lot in the last 2 days, it was so dry before then. I don't know what the water levels are right now, but I think it's very important that NERWIC, since they are starting to get together, this is one of the primary reasons they were created back in the 90s. So I think it's a great idea that everyone is mentioning here, but I don't want to leave out the function in Norwalk of the Code Enforcement Committee. If you decide that that's not of interest, then I think we should have individual meetings with the two water utilities. They have commissioners. We could be asked to be put on their agenda. Maybe we'll do that anyway. I mean, they'll assure you that they have enough water, but the thing is, we want to let them know that we want to make sure that things are planned properly, and then we can ask to speak on an agenda item in discussion with the zoning commission, because they always have discussion items at the end of their zoning meetings, and we could ask to be put on the agenda and just have a brief discussion, just as a proactive preventive measure.
Don't forget that we've asked the first taxing district for a public hearing about raising the group's reservoir dam. So we are in conversation with them right now. But I think going to that meeting is a great idea. When are those meetings?
I can find out and send it to you all.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea.
Diane, to answer your question, between the first and the second, the water gauge in the Norwalk River bumped up significantly. It went from standing around 1.1 cubic feet per second, well up to 1.6. And later on, it has dropped down. And I assume it's going to drop down pretty quickly. The average discharge per cubic feet, the median is 16 cubic feet per second. And we were down to about 5 cubic feet per second. And we had a quick bump up to 60 cubic feet, and it dropped down. It's dropped down very quickly already. So we know when we get these rains, we get a quick bump, but that's not going to raise water levels overall. And one of the things I wanted to toss out, Chris, one of the things that was very significant at the meeting that was held at Wilton, and I think, Louise, you helped pull that together. I remember the speakers from Greenwich indicating how much a voluntary restriction helped them keep water. Do you remember that conversation?
Yeah, actually though, Aquarian, it wasn't voluntary. I think
Right.
Aquarian had already put them, right, Chris? Yeah.
Right, not voluntary, that was required by the town.
It was.
Town had an
They
ordinance.
reduced, they reduced their consumption significantly.
Right.
And if we can avoid that, it would be a great thing.
Yeah.
Okay, back to the agenda.
Joe, if I may, could I bring up 2 points?
Go ahead.
To answer Diane and Louise, the Code Enforcement Committee hasn't met in 6 months, and there's no future meetings planned. Really, it's for large-scale projects, and the water districts don't, always appear to those meetings. It always depends on the project. The second point I was going to make is the health director. Just to give you data on recent conditions, the health director has briefings daily with the mayor's office, with emergency management, and also the 2 water companies. I can tell you as of today, SNU has told us that they are currently at 84% for their measurement in the reservoir. Their trigger starting next week is 75% for the drought stage. So we did get initial rain last night. We had 0.7 a few days earlier, but it did not have any effect on the reservoirs. So the city is going to have messaging on all their electronic messaging boards for dry conditions to conserve water.
Excellent. Excellent.
How about the first taxing district? What are they saying? Because they have, the wells, and then they have their reservoir system.
Right. Deanna did talk to them today. I didn't have the numbers to present, but she has been in conversation with them.
The main thing is education, just so people have the basic connection. This watering my lawn is coming out of the river. I think that's our main goal. Don't you think?
Yep.
There's several ways they can cut it. And a lot of people just don't think logically. Brushing your teeth. Most people let the water run while they're brushing their teeth, and instead of turning it on, turning it off, turning it on and turning it off. Taking a shower. How many people start the shower up, wait for it to get to a certain temperature, run around, do a few things, and then jump into the shower? And it's just making them cognizant of how can I reduce our consumption. And
it's also outdoor.
Yes.
People with sprinkler systems use 40% more water.
Yep.
Than people without them.
So it's, maybe we can get News 12 to jump in on it. This is why I'd like to get a draft out, just to start the conversation, so that possibly someone in the city hall would want to have a conversation on Channel 12 on how we can do this. Rather than, we can go into committee meetings about this, we can drag it on, but let's get the conversation started. Okay, and we'll come back to that. I want to get to number 1 on the new business list. And Jeff, you wanted to talk about the turbidity testing.
Oh, okay. And unfortunately, I'm not going to make much of a different report than last month, but as you know, that one of the concerns, or I guess you say major concerns, of the Harbor Commission and the Shellfish Commission is the effect of the Walk Bridge project on water quality, and also and related to that, the turbidity that may be generated by the work by dredging and by other parts of the construction. And so as a part of every big construction project that's in the coastal area, there has to be best management practices employed and measures taken to limit turbidity, because the turbidity is considered I don't know what exactly the word is, but without analyzing the sediment for contamination, if you know that there's contaminated sediment and there's turbidity generated, then you assume that there's contamination in the water. So that when we started this, and this has been, I think, a positive aspect of this project. But when we started the project, the DOT hadn't thought of taking special measures to deal with turbidity. But after our discussions over time, DOT established 3 monitoring stations of turbidity. So they're essentially determining what the background conditions are in the river with respect to turbidity, with the idea being that during the work, if you exceed a reasonable level that represents background conditions, then you have to stop work because you're basically, you know that your construction work is generating the additional turbidity. So the three stations, the Harbor Commission and the Shellfish Commission, asked Professor Hart, who in my opinion is a brilliant guy, who did the work on the I-95 bridge and also the statistical analysis of relating the bacteria upstream in the river with the harbor. But he looked at 10,000, and I'm looking at my notes, data observations from the DOT. And he also looked at that, did some sort of a statistical analysis and factored in wind speed and direction that he got from, I guess, from Bridgeport and or whatever the nearest weather station for that is, and rainfall. And then he's come up with some charts and graphs basically showing that there's not a big variation in turbidity in the river. And so the question is, well, what does that mean for attaching what we call an action level, a number to measure turbidity above which during the project, if you exceed that level, then you have to shut down the project, and you're assuming that it's caused by the project, and you have to figure out what's causing it. So we have his observations, his preliminary observations, the results of looking at 10,000 data points. And the next step, as it's been for the last several months, is to discuss that work in sort of a working session with the representatives of DEEP, because DEEP has to attach that action item to the permit. So right now we're working on setting up such an informal discussion meeting with Professor Hart, Joe, you as a participant, Steve from the Shellfish Commission, Dr. Pinto, and two fellows from DEEP. So we're in the process of working on that, and we hope to be able to do that in the next month prior to DOT making a presentation to the Harbor Commission and Shellfish Commission of their overall plans the first week in August. So it's something we've been working on for a long time, and a lot of work has gone into this analysis, Joe, and we need to realize the benefits of it because we're not doing this to try to mess up the project or delay it, but to contribute to a good project and contribute information, as one of the DEP guys said, that may be applicable in other areas of Connecticut too, other projects where they've got to measure background levels of turbidity for a while before an actual project. So I'm sorry for going on again, but that's where we are, Joe.
Okay, did any of you have any questions for Jeff first?
Yeah, I do, Jeff. I thought they were supposed to have those measuring devices in the water for a year to cover all 12 months because they pulled them out already.
Well, that's something to discuss, Pete. I don't know. We have, they provided, I don't know how much well, Professor Hart got the data. What the status is of the DOT's work on this and measurements. We haven't seen any of their work. We're in effect trying to make a contribution to the project. I don't know what the requirements were for them to continue to monitor, or whether they feel that they've done enough monitoring. Maybe they do, but
I thought we made an agreement that those would stay in, so when the project starts, they can still monitor it.
Well, yeah, but that goes without saying. When the project starts, they've got to be monitoring it on a 24-hour basis to determine if the established threshold is exceeded. But what the status is of what they've done with the sites now, and what the results are of their own analysis, we don't know, Pete. We're trying to do, we're basically doing this on our own, trying to help and trying to contribute. So that's why we want to have.
But what I'm saying is they haven't done a full year, 12 months of taking readings. So their basis of what they're coming up with is false because they haven't taken a full year reading.
Well, then maybe that's something we can discuss if we can get this meeting in the next 3 or 4 weeks with Deep to raise this issue and what that may mean. I mean, Deep, I don't know what else to say about that, Pete. I mean, that's another thing to ask DOT when they come before the Harbor Commission and the Shellfish Commission.
Right. Okay, well, we're getting off track on
Yeah, but
quality.
It's
Yeah, we
also,
I'll shut my mouth.
it's also not clear what happens if there is an exceedance over the values that Jeff mentions, whether or not there will be an automatic work stoppage and investigation or just an investigation. We need to get some clarity on that.
Yeah, Jeff,
Yeah.
if you can get back to us with when this meeting is going to happen, I think several of us would greatly appreciate it.
Yeah, but again, this isn't going to be a public meeting, Joe, with a whole bunch of, it's just to discuss the observations that our consultant has made, and then we can report back and then decide what, I mean, the big question, and it gets related to what Pete's saying, do we need to continue to do more analysis of more data points, or more data observations? And that's, so we stopped after, or I say we, Professor Hart did after 10,000, after putting into his program 10,000 observations. Do we need to do more? I don't know.
Where were these 10,000 observations from?
The 3 sites that are monitoring the turbidity, Dick. There's one at the police dock, one on the Stroffolino Bridge, and one on the railroad bridge. There were 3 instruments.
Okay.
And what 10,000 observations means, I don't know. It's just he looked at a lot of data. That's all, the best I can tell you.
Dick, just for a point of reference, I have an issue with the one at the police dock because it's not on the dock. It's not submerged at a specified depth. It's down on the piling so that it is getting tidal change as a factor. So that impacts the turbidity reading. And that also impacts how you read the daily plankton movement. So it's I mean, we can talk about that at the meeting. Okay, I'd like to move on because I want to come back to the letter. Did any of you go or watch the Manresa meeting with the DOT? No one? Louise, you did? Okay, Steve?
Yeah,
you
I did.
Did you get anything out of it?
I mean, my main, well, it didn't seem as bad for, I think the main consideration, if I lived down there, I'd be worried about all the traffic. But in terms of, we looked at where the terrapins nest, and it's not in the area where, they're going to be docking. I didn't feel like it was a battle that I needed to fight, honestly.
I hear you. Steve?
No, so we're still reviewing, obviously, but there are some tangential issues associated with this. One of which is that we assume that all of the barge, not traffic, but stationing would be there. The application currently indicates that they would use other sites as well. So it's not the be all and end all from our perspective.
Okay. Anybody have any questions about it? Basically, we assume that they have been given permission to work and store barges at the Manresa in their offloading channel that they have. This was a recommendation several of us had made to them to see if they could get permission to do it, rather than put barges in the harbor,
Right.
or not only the inner harbor, but the outer harbor. And apparently they've been able to do it. But they also said they would be bringing in heavy equipment via road, and that could be an issue going through South Norwalk, as well as an issue depending on how heavy it is. Pete has a better idea of what that road can handle as far as weight, but that the mud and the marsh that is there is a quick marsh. It's literally boulders were put in that weighed well over 60 tons to build that road, and they would disappear overnight. So it's going to be an interesting place to work from.
Joe, help me on one thing. Are they going to put that span together there and take it up the river, or are they going to build the span down where they've initially intended?
As far as I know, they're going to do a good portion of the construction there. John?
Yeah, I mean, the road traffic, that meeting turned out to be what I guessed it would be. A fact-finding tour to see where the objections were, where
Right.
the issues were with the interested parties that live in that area. The irony is that, as Jeff pointed out, their drop dead date for comments was the 3rd, and they sent their letter in to Deep on the 26th. So that tells me that they don't care about the comments.
Correct.
And they're not addressing them. As far as the road is concerned, you got to keep in mind that for many, many, many years, when that was a coal plant, you had the coal coming in by barge, but all the fly ash and the weight, you had all kinds of tractor trailers and dump trucks going back and forth, pulling that fly ash out. And they built a couple of developments in Norwalk and filled in wetlands with that fly ash. That was one of the things that they did with it for a bunch of years. So there's really no real concerns about, I think, the road stability and the underlying is, and the road going into the property was built well to take that kind of traffic too, with the coal and stuff that was going in and out. What bothers me somewhat is that they made statements during that conversation saying that by using this site, they were going to save a lot of money by not having to put bulkheads on Donardo and Fowler's property, and they wouldn't have that need and use there any longer. But the new application of that 1,000 or 100,000 pages that we haven't really reviewed, I believe, now says that they're going to do that as well. So if somebody's making a real windfall, if they don't have a need for it in one breath, they're getting all this stuff, work done for free. And shouldn't the city be getting this kind of benefit by putting additional docks across the way, expanding the visitors' docks? That money be put towards bulkheads on the other side of the river that we could utilize and take advantage of and be a benefit to the community, opposed to just two developers enhancing their properties that are actually in violation and have been for many, many years, because these bulkheads were mandated to be done a long time ago and were never done. So that to me is a major issue and a takeaway from that meeting that they had.
Okay. Any other comments?
Yeah, what's the new structure being built at the Maritime Center?
That's the IMAX Theater,
The new one?
the new one.
Have you made those comments in writing to the DOT commissioner, John? That might not be a bad idea. Put it in
Well,
writing.
the remarks we did make to them, it was that they're not adhering to the comment period, and they put their application in prior to the ending of the comment period.
Okay.
And as far as the incongruousness of the plan for what they said that they were going to do, and then where they had an inherent savings, that is something we will address at the Harbor Commission, and Shellfish Commission will address it as well. I mean, because those are our funds, whether they come federal, state, or local. That's our benefit, and we're going to enhance someone's property to build a whole lot more apartments that'll add to our water shortage concerns.
John makes a great point about the dual. It was very surprising. I listened to some of the Zoom meeting. Because I have a lot of other things I'm working on, but the thing is, I looked at how they're handling the issue of the toxins that are on the site and how they're planning to separate their work with different kinds of layers to make sure that they don't either get into the layers of concern that need to be remediated in some way by the previous owner and NRC. So I've just been looking at that. But John makes a great point about no need to also do the bulkhead up the street on Water Street if they're going to allow for this to happen on Manresa.
So
Okay.
I just like to quickly add that the Harbor Commission and the Shellfish Commission sent in writing a list of questions during that public meeting on the 16th, and to my knowledge, there has not been a response.
Okay, we're getting near the end of time here. And we have a Shellfish meeting coming up. Is there any final thing you want to say about the Manresa? Are we good?
I can make one comment.
Go ahead.
As far most of their stuff is going to come in by barge.
Yeah.
The traffic they're talking about it's probably going to be just workers' traffic. Not that much material is going to come in that way. Because the steel is so long and everything, it's got to come in by barge.
That's what they told us they were planning. Yep.
So as far as doing any damage there, I think it's just worker traffic is all it's going to be.
That was the impression I got.
So,
But you don't know what they plan for and what they may have to do are two different things.
you never know what they're going to do.
No. Very quickly, can I hear a motion to accept the minutes from the last meeting? I sent them all. I think I sent you all a copy of it.
Yeah, I did.
Any changes to the minutes?
No, I make a motion to accept the minutes.
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
The opposition? Okay, the minutes carry. And then one last thing. I will send around to you the draft for water usage in Norwalk with Louisa's edits. Please send it back to me with any changes you would like. And I will put that together in a final draft and get it out to whomever. Now, if you have ideas of who it should be sent to, I know it should be sent to the Planning Commission. Tom, correct me if I'm wrong, but the health director should get a copy of this.
Yes.
And anybody else besides the mayor?
The Zoning Commission Chair.
Okay.
And also the Planning Committee of the Common Council and the Health and Safety Committee of the Common Council, because they deal with water. They're supposed to deal with water quantity, and they do not yet. So this will help them learn what they're supposed to be covering.
I was going to send it to the Common Council in general.
And them, and yeah, that's right, in general, but also these specific committees where they have dominion over building and also water quantity and quality.
Okay.
Joe, I would keep King and Casey in the loop too, this way, because then there's no excuses that they didn't know.
Okay.
Yes.
And we're doing that now as a matter of rule of things at the Harbor Commission as well, because what happens is, they have plausible deniability, but if the two of them know about it,
yep,
there is none, because they're the coordination between and amongst and in between all these different departments.
Hey, John, can you send me their contact information?
One is L. King and the other one is J. Casey at norwalk.org, whatever.
norwalkct.org.
norwalkct.org.
Okay. I don't want to get Pete anxious here. Can I hear a motion to adjourn? Jeff, did you raise your hand?
No.
Oh. Second?
Any other
Second,
meetings at 7:15, correct?
Yes.
yes. Hurry up and eat, John.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Have a safe and happy 4th of
Yeah,
July.
be
people.
well.
All right,
Stay
bye,
Be
guys.
healthy.
well.
Take
Guys,
care.
Next
too.
meeting,
Bye-bye.
August
Have a
Bye.
good day.
Tom,
Thanks a
please,
lot.
Tom, please check your work email if you could, please. Tom?
Yep.
Yeah, please check your work email. I just sent you, we need another invitation sent out.
Okay. That's got to come from whoever the,
However, you have the moderator's contact, it's for Jeff.
I'm here. Tom, you could just email it to me and then I'll send the invite.
okay. Very good. Thank you, Anthony.
No problem.
Thanks, thank you.
Anthony, what email do you want me to send it to?
My work email, so amatthew@norwalkcity.org.
Okay. I'll get it to you right now.
Okay.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.